Marvel's Wolverine feels far more different from Marvel's Spider-Man than we expected. It's way more brutal, surprisingly methodical, and much more story-driven than Insomniac's previous Marvel games. After spending a couple hours with it ourselves, getting hands-on with both the opening of the game and a much later mission, there's a lot to unpack and a few things that surprised us. A huge thanks to PlayStation and a special shout out to Millicent, who is lovely, for inviting us out to the preview, where alongside our hands-on time, we also had the chance to tour Insomniac's studio, speak with several of the developers, pick their brains, and sit down with the narrative director Walt Williams. So throughout this video, we'll be mixing together our first-hand impressions with plenty of extra details we learnt behind the scenes, and loads of research that 2.6 did going all the way back to the announcement of the game. We both can't wait to try the full game out, but we certainly have enough to talk about now. So let's dive into everything we experienced, how Marvel's Wolverine actually plays, what's different from Spider-Man, and whether it's shaping up to be one of Insomniac Games' best titles yet. But before getting into the details, it's worth explaining what exactly we got to play, because the preview was split into two very different parts of the game. The first section was right at the beginning of Wolverine's story, at least his story during the context of this game. That's because this isn't an origin story, and here we spent around an hour learning the game's core mechanics, getting to grips with the combat, and seeing how the opening narrative starts to unfold. It actually does a really good job of introducing everything naturally, giving you enough time to understand how to control Logan properly, how the combat flows, and the different progression systems that gradually open up. After that, the demo jumped much further ahead into the story, giving us a later mission with a far more developed version of Logan. We suddenly had access to a lot more skills, upgrades, a ton of costumes to pick, and the progression systems that weren't available during the open section were available here. Altogether, it gave us a much better idea of how the game expands once those first few hours have gone by. The transition was definitely a bit of a shock though, because it immediately threw you into a pretty intense boss fight, and compared to the opening, this encounter demanded much more attention, with large area attacks, chaining combos, and mechanics that really punished poor timing or spamming. This alone was a good first look at how much the combat opens up later in the game, so I actually really enjoyed it. And then once that was over, we got some time to explore one of the hub areas. We could experiment with the different costumes, browse some of the progression systems in the menus, and try some of the optional activities, including challenges that tie into uncovering Logan's past. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to capture our own footage during this preview, so I can't show you absolutely everything that we saw, especially all the juicy menu and progression stuff, but we will talk about it, and we also have brand new gameplay provided by PlayStation to show you in this video. Now, the combat was easily the biggest highlight of the preview for me. Going in, I expected something that borrowed quite heavily from Spider-Man, and while you can definitely feel Insomniac's level of polish to this, Wolverine basically stands alone with its own identity and feeling. It's much heavier and more grounded, it's far more visceral, and it really rewards playing aggressively, which personally I got on with. Every hit has a satisfying amount of impact, enemies react convincingly to your attacks, and the sheer amount of animation variety and takedowns really kept things fresh, at least in what I played. Between the far more brutal finishes, various environmental interactions, and the amount of gore that this game can have, it really sells on the fantasy of playing as Wolverine, and the switch to a mature age rating for this game definitely reflects that. At its core, the combat revolves around building rage. Landing your attacks, parrying enemies, and keeping that momentum going will gradually increase your rage level. This basically just makes you stronger the longer you fight, and early on you're mostly relying on standard attacks, with square attacks that chain together to make your regular combos, while triangle can be used as a finisher, doing a heavy claw double strike. One move that I found myself consistently using though was the directional leap attack with triangle, which made you immediately close distance on an enemy and pounce on them. This kept the pace of combat feeling very fast, in a similar way to how Spider-Man can zip between enemies with his web in those games. Overall, it felt natural to the character and helps you maintain that relentlessness that Wolverine is generally known for. As you progress through though, the combat starts to open up considerably. Techniques unlock entirely new things, from sprinting multi-attacks to a stronger charged leap attack that can stagger enemies, defensive upgrades, and more. There were plenty more fun things to get as you go through the game. Alongside that, you also have special techniques, and these are basically like your abilities and work on individual cooldowns. They're assigned to the face buttons while holding L2, and during a later section of the preview, we had access to a much wider selection of these. Now, the Rage Bar was probably my favorite system because it had an awesome payoff. As you move through the different tiers, Logan gets stronger. but by the time you reach tier 3 in your rage, you go into a special mode that starts draining the bar but unlocks critical strikes against weakened enemies. The cool thing is, enemies get weakened in this state nearly instantly, and a critical strike is basically an instant takedown in brutal fashion. So you could jump between enemies doing some of the most brutal execution animations in the game, and you could do this back to back until your rage ends. It was kind of reminiscent of the Ghost mode in Ghost of Tsushima, so it's always something awesome that you want to pull off. Also, it wasn't just cool, it was actually really efficient in terms of the gameplay, because you could deal with the stronger enemies much more easily and wipe out groups really fast. Another mechanic that's interesting is how they've handled Wolverine's healing in this adaptation. Instead of making Logan effectively immortal, kind of like he is, your rage instead acts as your safety net. If you take enough damage and go down in a fight, but you have enough rage available, Last Stand will let you fight your way back onto your feet by spamming square. As you take damage, you can see Wolverine's suit rip apart, his adamantium skeleton get exposed before his body regenerates around it during this revival mechanic, which was cool to see. Also, you may have seen his suit self-healing, and well, I raised this point directly to the narrative director in our interview, so make sure to keep an eye out for that on the channel. On the defensive side of things, it felt really snappy and responsive. Parries are performed with L1, and you could cancel out of most attacks and even interrupt certain animations, making the combat feel really fluid because you weren't locked into things. Stealth was also an option where you could use Logan's heightened senses to track enemies through walls by listening for their heartbeats. So you could take them out one by one, do various stealth takedowns, and you could even jump high into the air and perform a mid-air takedown. You don't just have to do it from a nearby ledge or the ground behind them, which was really nice. That said, after seeing how fun the actual combat is, I found myself more or less just running into fights. It was just more fun. Now, while the combat was the thing I probably liked most, it didn't take long to realize that Insomniac is putting a much bigger emphasis on Wolverine's story here. This definitely feels much more like a narrative-driven experience than Marvel's Spider-Man. It also has a darker tone, which does suit Logan's character well. One thing that surprised me though is the game doesn't retell Logan's full origin story. He already has his adamantium skeleton at this point, he just doesn't remember exactly all the details and what's happened in his past, and so as you go through the game, you're chasing down these answers as well as following other narrative threads that I won't spoil for you. And during later mission segments, we also came across optional side content called Nightmare Doors. These are timed challenge rooms that not only unlock new adaptation perks, but also gradually reveal your forgotten memories. Essentially, the faster you complete them, the more maximum strand allowance you would get, giving you more room to equip additional passive upgrades. More on this later. But for everything that we've learned from developer interviews and the preview itself, this version of Marvel's universe also takes a slightly different direction than you may think. You see, mutants in this world are largely in the shadows, with most of the wider world not even knowing they exist yet. Logan isn't part of the established X-Men team either. Instead, he finds himself drawn into Team X alongside familiar faces like Sabretooth and Mystique. We also know that Logan's journey will take him around the world, with places like Madripoor, Canada, and Tokyo. It's a sort of globe-trotting structure, and it's actually one of the reasons why Insomniac moved away from the Spider-Man open world formula that's set wholly inside of New York. This time, you're going through completely different areas and locations that are distinctly different, so I can see why they've done it. But let's talk about the exploration and structure. Wolverine feels much more like a linear or wide linear game. The story generally pushes you from mission to mission across these different locales around the world, but you're still given opportunities to slow down and explore a bit, and in some cases address combat and situations how you want to. Throughout the sections we played, there were some side paths to investigate, with things like hidden resources tucked away, but from the limited sections that we did try, it was overall very linear. In the places that you could go out of your way, they were often worth doing because you could get materials which are later used for crafting new suits. Crates were hidden throughout the levels containing these resources, and I'm sure you can discover suits in other ways, but there was also claw variants. During our preview build, I counted there were 27 suits in the menu and 20 claw designs, although several of them were blacked out, so it definitely looks like there are plenty more to discover in the full game. I just don't really know, but I thought you'd be interested. The levels themselves also encouraged a surprising amount of player choice. Stealth was truly optional. If you wanted to quietly thin out a camp of enemies, you could, but on the other hand, if you preferred to charge straight in like me, the game supports that as well. I found myself doing a little bit of both depending on the encounter, but combat was just the highlight, so get stuck in. I do worry if the overall dramatic shift to a wide linear setup will land well, given how many of us are used to the freedom and amazing sense of exploration of the Marvel Spider-Man games. But I do think narratively it makes sense and works. I just really want to know how it feels after getting further in the story, and if there's any large areas to explore, since most of the preview was pretty straightforward. One area that surprised me though was just how much progression the game has. I wrote down so many notes on this, but I just can't show you it because I couldn't record, so I'll touch on the main things that you want to know and you can enjoy this cool gameplay. As you level up, you'll earn technique points. These are used across several different progression trees, and the main technique tree ranges from things like stronger leap attacks, new combo extensions, defensive upgrades, and more. Then you have special techniques, which are active abilities that give you a fair amount of freedom to tailor things to your playstyle. Then there's another layer called adaptations, and this is essentially a passive perk system. As you unlock new adaptations, you can equip them using a limited number of strand allowance. This means you couldn't use everything at once. Instead, you had to mix and match different things depending on how you play. And during the preview, I only had 4 strand allowance slots, but completing those Nightmare Door challenges did increase that. And then you have cosmetic progression, and it goes deeper than you think. It's not just new visual suits. As you unlock more suits and cosmetics, you actually increase your maximum health as well. And during the preview, I saw that they had unlocked 165% maximum health with 8 suits unlocked, and from what I could see, there were 27 total different ones. The claws also got this treatment, as said before, with around 20 variants in the preview that I saw, and some of them are tied to particular suits, while others are unlocked separately. There were things like gold, diamond, curved claws, and more. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by how much work has gone into the progression systems here, especially considering it is a more linear style of game now. Now, beyond just gameplay things, I was also very impressed with the overall presentation. Performance particularly stood out because preview events can often be a bit of a mixed bag. It's not unusual to run into crashes, visual bugs, or frame rate problems in previews because developers are still fixing things. But across my entire hands-on session, I didn't experience anything like that. Everything was stable from start to finish, and I only had one visual bug. Now, we were playing on console, although I couldn't confirm exactly what the hardware was or the graphics mode that it was running on was. Overall, the whole thing ran really smooth. I'm definitely interested to learn more though about the different performance modes if there are any, closer to launch, and how things are on base PS5 versus Pro. We'll have to find out. And of course, visually, it has that level of quality you would expect from Insomniac. The character models are excellent, the environment's packed with details, and the sheer amount of animation work throughout the combat was really good. One thing that stood out to me, as mentioned, was the finishing takedown animations. Encounters were very rarely repetitive because of the sheer variety in them, and they all looked so good. The audio also deserves a shout out, from the voice acting to the motion capture in cutscenes and the combat noises, the soundtrack, everything to do with the audio felt top notch, at least to me. It's also worth mentioning that Insomniac are continuing to put a big emphasis on accessibility. There was a load of accessibility options, including things like removing repeated button presses. You could even turn off and disable all of the blood and dismemberment stuff, so there are good options there. And alongside the hands-on preview, I also got a chance to spend some time at Insomniac's studio in California. And as someone who's grown up playing Spyro and Ratchet & Clank, this was pretty cool. We got to explore several areas of the studio. There were these themed spaces inspired by different locations in the game, and we also got to see the in-house motion capture stage, the facial scanning facilities, and hear directly from different teams working on the project. But one thing that stood out to me was just how passionate these developers are within their own field of expertise. Whether it was the facial capture technology or hearing the audio team geek out about how they approach different sound effects, you could tell that these guys really cared about what they individually were doing. As mentioned before, I also got to sit down with the narrative director Walt Williams, whose previous work includes games like Spec Ops: The Line, BioShock 2, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and Mafia 2. And we had some really fun conversations about Wolverine's story, gameplay, costumes, and more. So keep an eye out because that full interview will be coming on the channel very soon. And another highlight was meeting Liam McIntyre, who plays the big man himself, Wolverine. If you've seen Spartacus Vengeance or War of the Damned, you probably already know him as the lead character. But after spending some time chatting with him, it's clear he's a lovely and down-to-earth guy, and he is committed to this role. From everything we experienced in the preview, I think he is shaping up to be a fantastic fit for this version of Wolverine, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of his performance in the full game. Overall, after spending a couple hours with Marvel's Wolverine, I've come away impressed by the overall feel and polish. I love the combat, the characters, the performances, and the story so far. I'm just not so sure how much fun the more linear design of the game will be compared to the Spider-Man titles, so we'll have to wait and see in the full game how things go when you get a little deeper. It's clear that these are very different types of games, but you can still feel Insomniac's DNA throughout the whole thing, and I cannot wait to try more. It will really all come down to just how good the story payoff is and what awesome bosses and enemies we get to fight along the way. So drop a like down below if you enjoyed this preview, and do subscribe because we'll be back with more on Wolverine and more videos on your favourite games coming very, very soon. Here at Arix Gaming, we're two friends who love to play games. You have me, Paradise, as well as 26.
Our goal is to keep the videos as concise as possible by cutting out any of the fluff and focusing on what really matters with high quality videos.
So make sure you're subscribed down below for more videos on your favourite games coming very, very soon.